These pictures will be forever etched in the minds of troops at Fort Bragg. A crash in the sky turns to chaos on the ground.
It's just a huge fireball the size of a building, you know, a good size building coming at you. And we didn't even hear it coming until it was too late.
This is the 82nd Airborne Division, fearless among fighting units.
From Fort Bragg, home of the airborne and the center of the military universe, this is the All American Legacy Podcast. An inside look at the 100-year history of the 82nd.
They are all American all the way.
Hello again, and welcome back to another episode of the All American Legacy Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Burnett, and today we are going to travel back more than 23 years to March 23rd, 1994. This is one of the darker days in the 82nd Airborne Division's 100-year history. There were two airborne ops scheduled for the day. One of the lines belonged to the 18th Airborne Corps, and the other belonged to 2nd Battalion, 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment. Neither jump would occur. The events of March 23rd, now known as the disaster at Green Ramp, would mark the single greatest loss of life in a single day for the division since the Battle of the Bulge. The morning of March 23rd began like so many on Fort Bragg. Kevin Miller, or Specialist Miller, a mortarman in 2504 at the time, tells us what he remembers about that day.
You know what, the 82nd Airborne Division jumps rain or shine, and sometimes we're blessed with outstanding weather, and that day was going to be one of those. It was, if there was clouds in the sky, it was very little. It was warm, and it was a perfect day to do a jump. You don't really get, especially you're doing mostly night jumps, and your opportunity to get a day jump in good weather doesn't come around very often in division. But just for our platoon, the 2nd Battalion, 504th 81mm Mortar Platoon, we had a 2-day field problem that was going to be tied into this. We were planning on coming back that Friday, so we were going to jump. We were going to have notional heavy drop vehicles on the drop zone, as well as a couple of heavy drops that we were going to put in for this 2-day operation.
For the rest of the paratroopers on the bird, this was considered a fun jump. In fact, for Private Richard Clapp, a member of 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, this was the ideal day to get his first jump at division.
Yeah, what else could you ask for? 1,250 feet, beautiful day. I think it was close to 70 degrees that day, clear blue skies, like I said, Hollywood jump. I was even told that there was some Australians there, so there was a possibility of us getting Australian jump wings during this. So, I mean, what else could you ask for your first jump?
It was during sustained airborne training, something all paratroopers conduct prior to exiting an aircraft, that Specialist Miller realized something had gone wrong.
And we had come over, and we were somewhat in a half circle around the mock door, and just going over some, I think if I remember correctly, static line injury was the last part I remember. And if memory serves me, I think it was Sergeant First Class Howard who was going over that. And we were facing away from the tarmac, the runway itself. And I just got done doing PLF, so I was standing in the back as opposed to taking an E up front. And at that point, I remember, and I can't remember quite if it's Sergeant First Class Howard or another member who was doing the block of instruction, but they said something to the effect of maybe expletive crash. And I know some of us turned around rather a little slow just to kind of look to see what they were referencing. And my initial, vision was I didn't see anything really wrong until the 141 was impacted, and the fireball basically at that point was seconds away from just washing over us.
At approximately 2 p.m. local time, an F-16 collided with a C-130 over Green Ramp, and the pilot of the F-16 lost control. As the C-130 landed safely, the F-16 continued to spin out of control, and both pilots punched out. The jet hits the tarmac and begins to tumble, rolling across the runways and colliding with a parked C-141 Starliner that had just been topped off. The fuel ignites, turning it into a rolling ball of metal, debris, and flame, and Specialist Miller is caught in the middle of it all.
Well, you have a very tunnel vision view of things. I remember people around me, but not actually individual actions. I know for me it felt like just trying to run, but your feet are stuck in. You have mere seconds. Things are slowing down as it's tumbling towards you.
The next voice is that of Lieutenant Colonel retired Jay Nelson, second lieutenant and platoon leader in 2504 at the time. He recalls what happened after the initial explosion.
Yeah, I took about 2 steps and then I started diving for the ground. And then in the amount of time it took me to take those 2 steps, the F-16 hit the tarmac and scraped across about 950 feet of the parkway, hit a C-141 that had just been topped off with JP-4, and then the fireball and the debris is what engulfed those of us that were there at Green Ramp at the time. I was at the first mock-up, so I was between the first mock-up and the old pack shed at the time, no more than 100 meters from where the actual crash happened with the C-141 and the F-16.
The flames wreak havoc on Green Ramp. Soldiers scramble to get away or duck for cover, but many cannot avoid the fire, including Private Clapp.
I wasn't knocked unconscious. I remember laying covered up, just like you do in basic training when they do the nuclear blast training. You know, you cover it with your head facing. Anyway, I felt the blast roll over me and just knew that I was on fire. I mean, I don't know how to explain it. You just know. And thinking back to stop, drop, and roll, that's just what I did. I just started rolling.
Mr. Miller also suffered injuries.
Actually, I at some point when we were all trying to run, I was hit, I believe, in the back and thrown quite a distance. I think, honestly, that saved me from a lot of the jet fuel and the other debris, because I was thrown and kind of put off to the side. Now, when I came to, I was in a fetal position, and luckily I was not in a fire area. I was in a small area that somehow wasn't on fire, and I tried to stand up, and my left leg wouldn't work. It was there, so I had some, I guess you figured we would take care of it later. It just wasn't working right now, so I was able to lock the knee out and stand up. And my hands were burnt severely, so the skin was sliding on those a little bit, and I also had burns on my face and a deep laceration to the back of the skull. And at that point, I just started moving like a number of the injured were. There was fire debris and god-awful images around, and like the others who were injured coming out of the fireball, we all just tried to get out of it.
As the paratroopers are still scrambling, a new element of mayhem is introduced. The F-16 is equipped with an M61 Vulcan cannon that fires a 20mm round, and these rounds were cooking off as the paratroopers are looking for cover. Now, once the rounds stop firing, everyone has to turn to a new task, which is getting everybody to the hospital.
You know, it was there was vehicles moving all over the place, and then obviously it was different back then, but we had the Jumpmaster School close by, and there was a lot of POVs parked out in that area. I remember maybe it was an old Cadillac. You know, it's been a few years, so it was probably only in the 80s, this model, but I believe I saw some people getting put into privately owned vehicles to be evacuated to Womack. I was almost put into a deuce and a half for medical evacuation to the hospital, but they were full, so my stretcher was pulled off of that, and I subsequently got put into a back of a Humvee with some other, I think it was 4 walking injured into that vehicle, and that's how we then moved on to Womack at that point.
The heat from the flames made medevac even more difficult, according to Mr. Clapp.
We started to evac. Another soldier came over and helped me out. We started to evac. The 20mm round started cooking off. We had to take cover for that for a while, and then we evac'd, got in a vehicle. The tires melted before we could leave, and so we evacuated that vehicle, got in another vehicle, and they drove us to Womack.
With so much going on, it seems like all of these events transpire over a greater length of time. But from the time of the crash to having nearly every injured paratrooper on their way to Womack Army Medical Center really only took about 15 minutes. This is something Mr. Miller attributes to the inherent nature of paratroopers to respond well in times of crisis.
You know, soldiers by their very natures are problem solvers. We had a medical facility that was a short distance away. We had injured paratroopers. It's not a car crash where you wait for an ambulance. The amount of lives saved that day and injuries that were, not exacerbated was simply because people took initiative, and any vehicle that was able to drive was hauling wounded and injured paratroopers to the hospital. And it was, at the time, it was a lot of information and visuals to process, but in hindsight, with all these years looking back at it, it was an amazing testament to the level of training and professionalism that our paratroopers have, that they got the mission done. They got people off of the impact area and to medical support as quickly as possible.
The crash claimed 9 lives at Green Ramp. 2 more would die en route to the hospital, and 55 paratroopers would be admitted. At 2:15 p.m., Womack got the call, and answering was Lieutenant General Patricia Araujo. She was the 43rd U.S. Army Surgeon General, but at the time, she was a major. These recordings were conducted at a professional development seminar, so I apologize about the background noise.
I was the Department of Emergency Medicine Chief Nurse and was working during the day shift at that time and received the call at 14:15 from our ambulance section saying that there has been plane collisions and that we're having injured paratroopers that will be arriving.
After the initial notification, a lot of the hospital staff were questioning whether or not this was real or part of a mass casualty exercise that they were scheduling for the following day. As the wounded paratroopers actually started coming into Womack, Sergeant Linda Jenkins quickly realized that this was no exercise.
I was one of the 91 Delta surgical technician in the operating room. My main job then was to take care of all the supplies for the OR and SICU. Okay. That day, that evening, I got a phone call in my office, and it said that there had been a crash on Pope to get ready. I immediately then started looking what I had in my storage room, got all the supplies. Make sure that we had enough stockage of saline, of sterile water, of packs and everything. By the time I got back to my office, I looked out my window and I saw the first wave come in. And what I saw were just trucks, like flatbed trucks and different vehicles coming and bringing casualties, bringing victims in. One of the bigger victims had a billboard or something on the back of it, and there was some soldiers on it that had been burned, clothing burned off of them, just skin just red, and you can see the peeling. And then they're going to take one of the soldiers off the vehicle. When they took him off, his leg just fell off onto the ground. When they took him, everybody kind of gathered around, got him in the ER. They picked the leg up and covered it and everything. But just people pouring in.
As the burned and wounded started pouring in, Lieutenant General Araujo says that the entire hospital went to work.
The first hour was controlled chaos, and within 5 minutes from notification, we had deuce-and-a-half trucks, we had motorcycles with sidecars, we had regular cars, vehicles. Our soldiers that were burned with their clothes off were stacked on top of each other, and amputation, multiple trauma, and we immediately began triaging, rendering care, and the response from the community, the hospital, because it was change of shift. Everyone was getting a physician, 2 nurses, paramedic, and getting life-saving measures.
As nurses, doctors, medics, and OR techs work diligently to render aid to their patients, the hospital is filling up with the severely burned and injured. Many of the hospital staff had never seen so many with these kinds of injuries.
There were just litters of people down the hallway, just everywhere. There were some moaning, just sight you never forget. They were burned, clothes burned off of them, but they were taking the saline and still water, just pouring it on them, just to relieve the pain, because they were in pain. In the room that I was scrubbed in, they brought a soldier in, a young guy. He was young. And when he came in the room, he asked us, he said, "Will y'all save me?" We all kind of everybody just got quiet. Because if you had saw the condition that he was in, we just knew that we're going to do our best, but in our mind and no one said a word, but you knew that it wasn't going to happen. But I remember when the nurses saying, "We got you, we got you."
Womack's medical staff worked tirelessly through the night rendering medical care. According to Major General Steve Jones, then the Womack deputy commander, other members of the staff had a different mission that night, ensuring the families of our paratroopers were taken care of.
Back at the time of Green Ramp, the benefit structure was different for survivors of a soldier that died on active duty compared to a soldier that died in a retired status. And for the most junior soldiers, for a very young soldier, the family got more benefits in many cases if they died on active duty because of the death gratuity. But for the vast majority, your family was far better off. They received more compensation if you died in a retired status. And so we did expeditious medical boards on individuals that were about to die to retire them as quickly as we could so their families could get more benefits.
Simultaneously, the entire Fort Bragg and Fayetteville, North Carolina community came together to help not only the paratroopers, but their families.
It's a blur as far as some of the activity that was going on there, but the thing that most got me was how many people were visiting from General Mike Steele on down. People were wanting to come to the hospital and check on us. The community itself, I know there was I would pass it on the way to treatment, there was a waiting area outside that was filled with drinks and food and anything that the family members needed, or those who were visiting us needed as far as food and drinks, because during these things people don't normally think to stop and have a drink or eat. So the community was really on top of things to want to make sure they showed the support both through the Fort Bragg community and Fayetteville as well.
In the coming days, the disaster at Green Ramp would claim 24 All American Paratroopers. Their names are immortalized here at Fort Bragg at the 82nd Airborne Division War Museum's Combat Training Memorial. If you can't make it here, their names are also listed in the show notes. 23 years later, the disaster at Green Ramp has had lasting impacts on Fort Bragg and U.S. Army operations. This year, in fact, Womack Army Medical Center even hosted a leadership seminar, educating some of their new medical staff on the events of that day. I've spent a lot of time researching the disaster at Green Ramp, and talking to these paratroopers and medical staff who lived through the event has been a very emotional experience. After weeks of research, I really had no idea how to end the episode. In one of my last conversations with Kevin Miller, however, I realized the best way to finish this episode is not to focus on the disaster itself, but to honor those who were so heroic that day. Hear their voices one last time.
That day, I can say for myself, that Womack worked as a team. Everybody, no matter who they were, it was one team. From the highest ranking to the lowest ranking, everybody was one team.
It's when every time we went up to a soldier, their very first words were, "Please take care of my buddy. I'm not as bad as they are." The selflessness of our soldiers is indescribable, but it's the heart of the American soldier.
I ended up between two Connexes as some of the ammunition from the F-16 started cooking off, and there was a guy who was there. He was a staff sergeant and he was in jump master class at the time, because we had the jump master school down there almost on the FLS at the time, and he ended up in between two Connexes with me and took one look at me and was like, "Hey, come on, we're going to get you out of here." I had no idea how badly I was hurt, and even then, after we figured we were establishing the triage point and trying to help folks get gathered up and put in trucks, I was wanting other folks to go. I was like, "Yeah, let the guys go, I'll be okay." And he's like, "No, sir, you need to get on this truck now." I had no idea how badly I was hurt. I was in shock, and I think had it not been for him just kind of shepherding me and helping me, I didn't realize what was going on, but he was like, "No, you need to get on there." Without him being there, I think I would have just kind of wandered around and not thought anything of it.
The second one was when I was talking with one of the injured female soldiers who shared her story of when a sergeant, and I believe it was Sergeant Price, threw her on the ground, got on top of her and whispered in her ear and said, "Get up and run now." And she did. And when she turned, he had taken the brunt of the fireball and had died at the scene.
There was one in particular when I was laying there and just trying to, they were just starting to treat my head wound, and I remember, and the years have not been kind with his name, but I remember his face. He was with S&T of our battalion, but when some of the secondary explosions, I believe the 20 millimeter, started cooking off, he actually laid down a little on top of me, which, as anyone knows, realistically wouldn't have stopped anything, but the amount of, I don't know, selflessness that act took was, it was amazing. And it was something that I was impressed with at the time, and more so as the years have progressed. And what I always try to tell people about this day is there was amazing acts of heroism, and some that didn't that didn't actually get printed, that didn't get told in second stories. And, you know, I always try to tell everybody that everybody within these units and on Fort Bragg was injured that day. They might not have gone to the hospital, they might not have shed blood, but it affected everyone.